It was the iconic photograph of the Great Depression, the migrant mother. She was a woman with determination. For her, giving up was never an option. No matter how tough life could get, she was the anchor that held her large family together. She has been called the Mona Lisa of the Great Depression. Now, March 1936, the timing belt on their old Hudson sedan snapped. The couple and their 7 children were able to coast into a pea pickers camp. They were just one migrant family in a camp with more than 3,000 other people, and they were all looking for the same thing, work. 7 years earlier, when the stock market crashed in October of 1929, the U.S. economy went spiraling out of control. Businesses closed, employees were out of work, banks failed, people survived any way they could. The mocking phrase, prosperity was just around the corner, was being said by more and more people out of work, and they had no hope of finding any job. The country was failing, and the people blamed President Herbert Hoover. No matter what President Hoover tried to do to change the economic course of the country, it only got worse. The people had lost faith in him. Now, the elections of 1932 brought hope for the country. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the people's choice to fix the country's economic problems. President Roosevelt set the tone of his new administration in his first inaugural address when he said in part, "This nation asks for action and action now." In Roosevelt's first 100 days, action was taken. His New Deal legislation was passed with the hopes of bringing relief to the country. There was the Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, signed into law in March of 1933. The Agricultural Adjustment Administration, the AAA, signed into law in May of 1933. The Federal Emergency Relief Administration, FERA, signed into law in May 1933. The National Industrial Recovery Act, the NIRA, signed into law in June of 1933. All these agencies were set up to help working Americans who had no work get work, farmers who had no fertile land to farm relocate to new farmlands, writers, artists, photographers who had no audience would have jobs documenting these programs. The press soon referred to these new programs as the alphabet agencies. On May 1st, 1935, President Roosevelt, by executive order 7027, established the Resettlement Administration. It had 4 divisions: the Rural Rehabilitation, Rural Resettlement, Land Utilization, and Suburban Resettlement. The main purpose was to move or resettle 655,000 people from worn-out, unproductive farmlands which had gone fallow onto planned cooperative farming communities or greenbelt cities. Congress didn't go for the plan of resettlement. They thought it was too socialist, but the Resettlement Administration did have the resources to set up relief camps for migrant workers in California. Why California? Well, on top of the economic crash, America experienced a series of droughts which started in 1934 and lasted until 1940. The genesis of the Dustbowl can be traced back to the Homestead Act of 1862. The overproduction of crops during World War I in the 1920s, farmers were plowing up every inch of land to grow food. However, by doing this, they removed the grasslands that checked soil erosion. So by 1934, the plains turned into a dust bowl where nothing would grow. Approximately 35 million acres of land had been rendered useless for farming. Another 125 million acres were losing the topsoil. The farmers had no choice. They had to leave. California was an agricultural giant just waiting to be awakened. And with the advent of the Hoover Dam, we had irrigation. So the Great Dust Bowl migration began. Dorothy Lang was a portrait photographer from San Francisco, and along with her husband, Paul Schuster Taylor, an economist at UC Berkeley, they began documenting the plight of the homeless and migrant workers. Her photo essays brought her into contact with the Resettlement Administration. Lang, along with hundreds of unemployed photographers, was employed by the Resettlement Administration. Her job, she was to document the daily life and hardships of these migrant workers for the United States government. Her photos, which were distributed to newspapers all over the country, have become part of the historical record of the Great Depression. One photo in particular would come to symbolize the hardship, strength, and resolve of the American character, the iconic photo of the migrant mother. Now, if you look at any book on the Great Depression or any U.S. U.S. high school history textbook, you'll see this picture. So who was the migrant mother? Well, Florence Leona Christie was born on September 1st, 1903, in what was called back then the Indian Territory. Today, it is called the state of Oklahoma. Now, at the age of 17, in 1921, she married Clyde Owens. At some point, the family moved to Sacramento, California, to work in the sawmills and the surrounding farms. By 1931, Florence was pregnant with her sixth child when Cleo died of tuberculosis. She supported herself and her children by working in the fields and restaurants of Sacramento. By the mid-30s, Thompson lived in the area of Shafter. It was there that she became involved with Jim Hill. Now, as a family, they worked as migrants following the harvest throughout California. Their lives were one of transience. To maintain a steady income, they had to follow the harvest around the state. So, when potatoes were ready to be picked, they had to be where the potatoes were. When the cotton was ready to be picked, they had to be there. And it was the same for peas, beans, and all the other crops. Now, with the influx of labor from the Dustbowl, wages were low. The family, along with all the migrant workers, could barely support themselves. Now, in Migrant Mother Update, American Story with Bob Dotson on NBC, Florence recounted how she picked cotton for 40 cents an acre. She picked between 400 to 500 pounds of cotton a day, from sun up until it became so dark she couldn't see. Now, the people who lived in these areas looked down upon the migrant workers and their children. Now, Florence's daughters recounted how those children would ridicule them for their lack of decent clothes. And that was due to the fact that the constant use in the fields and then going to school, and that their shoes had holes in them. As a migrant family, the children were in and out of multiple schools. They did not make friends with their classmates. They got shortchanged on their education. The brothers and sisters, though, relied on each other. Florence taught them to be self-reliant, not to expect anything from anyone. Florence Thompson and her family were survivors. In a 1992 interview with Thompson's daughters, Katherine, McIntosh, and Norma Rydlewski, Norma stated, "She was a very strong lady. We really relied on that. When we got up in the morning, we knew that there was going to be work and food, and the reason we knew that was my mom was going to see to it that we were going to survive that day." So by luck, chance, divine intervention, Florence Thompson and Dorothea Lange had a rendezvous with destiny. Now, Lange recounted that immortal day in the February 1960 edition of Popular Photography in the article titled, "The Assignment I'll Never Forget." It was the end of a cold, miserable winter. I'd been traveling in the field alone for months, photographing the migratory farm laborers of California and their ways of life, and the conditions in which they lived. Lange was ready to go back to her comfortable home. Lange stated she was worked out. She passed a sign directing migrant workers to a migrant camp. She ignored it. She just kept going. For 20 minutes she drove on through the cold rain. However, whether it was instinct or fate, Lange turned around and went back to the camp. Now, driving into the rain-sodden camp, Lange saw Florence Owens under a lean-to. She parked her car and approached Florence. Lange doesn't even remember how she introduced herself or what she wanted. In any event, Owens agreed to having her picture taken. Now, Lange took 5 pictures with her speed graphic camera, stating, "I do remember she asked me no questions. I made 5 exposures, working closer and closer from the same direction. I did not ask her name or her history. She told me her age, that she was 32. She said that they had been living on frozen vegetables from the surrounding fields and birds that the children had killed. Lange also said Owens told her they had just sold the tires to buy food. This would later be disputed by Owens' son Troy. For years, this was the story of the migrant mother. However, Florence Owens Thompson had a different take on the photo. In the late 70s, Thompson had written a letter to the editor of her local newspaper expressing her contempt of the photo. Thompson felt she had been used by Lange. She related her side of the famous photo session. Thompson said, "I wish she hadn't taken my picture. I can't get a penny out of it. Lange didn't ask my name, She said she wouldn't sell the picture. She said she'd send me a copy. She never did. Her son Troy recounted in an article for the New Times San Luis Obispo about that day in March 1936. When the photos were taken, Troy and his brother Leroy had gone to town to get the radiator repaired due to the hole they put in it while they were fixing the timing chain. When we got back, Mama told us there had been this lady who'd been taking pictures. But that's all she told us. You know, it wasn't a big deal to her at the time. He went on to correct the record of Lang's notes about selling the tires off the Hudson so they could eat. There's no way we sold our tires because we didn't have any to sell. The only ones we had were on the Hudson, and we drove off in them. Now, I don't believe Lang was lying. I just think she basically had one story mixed up with another, or she was borrowing to fill in what she didn't have. Lang did show the picture and discuss the camp conditions with the editor of a San Francisco newspaper. Now, showing him her photographs, whether it was the editor of a San Francisco newspaper or some bureaucrat at the Resettlement Administration who informed the federal authorities of the conditions in the camp. But the government did rush 20,000 pounds of food to the camp to prevent starvation. Now, at an exhibit of Lang's work long after the photos were taken, the curator of the museum where the exhibition took place stated, "Florence Thompson's life was most likely saved by Lang's photograph." Yeah, her children begged to differ. They said, "We were already long gone from Nipomo by the time any food was sent there. That photo may have saved some people's lives, but I can tell you for certain it didn't save ours. Our life was hard long after that photo was taken." Now, that photo never gave Mother or us kids any relief. In an interview done in 1979, Florence Owens Thompson answered NBC reporter Bob Dawson's questions. "Did you ever lose hope?" Florence replied without hesitation, "No. If I'd lost hope, I never would have made it." In the spring of 1983, 79-year-old Thompson was diagnosed with cancer. She moved in with her son Troy. Now, Florence's condition got to the point that she needed round-the-clock care, and the money wasn't there. Well, the article in the New Times stated Jack Foley of the San Jose Mercury News, when he heard about it, understood immediately the historic implications of Florence Thompson's plight. The story Foley filed for the Mercury generated national attention. More than $35,000 went into a special migrant mothers fund, administered by the Hospice Caring Project of Santa Cruz County, much of it coming in the forms of rumpled dollar bills. In the interview her daughters gave after Florence's death, they realized just how important that picture of their mother was. Her daughter Norma stated, "With every contribution that came in, there were notes. They were telling how Mother's picture gave them hope and inspiration during that time. We never really knew how my mother affected the nation." Her picture for a generation represented hope and an attitude of never giving up. Florence Owens Thompson passed away from a stroke, as well as cancer and heart problems, on September 16, 1983, at the age of 80. She is our history. She is our heritage. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please hit the like button, ring the bell, and subscribe to my channel for more interesting stories about America's past. Thank you for watching.